The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1. Titus Groan. Here and There. Swelter's thoughts were glued upon Flay's death at his own hand. The time was ripe. He had practiced the art of silent and stealthy movement until he could no longer hear even the breath note of his own footstep, which over the stretch of the last fortnight he had striven to stifle. He now moved his bulk across the earth as silently as the passing of a cloud through the dusk. His two-handed cleaver had an edge to it which sang with the voice of a gnat when he held it to his fungus of an ear. Tonight he would leave a small pink wafer at the top of the last flight of stairs within a bare 20 feet of the thin man. It would be a dark night. He listened to the thrumming rain, and his eyes turned to the lake on the cold floor far down the dining hall. He stared at, but did not see, the bleared reflection of the flanking cherubs 100 feet above the steel-grey veneer of water. His eyes were unfocused. He would do the work he had waited to do tomorrow night. Tomorrow night. As his tongue emerged from between his lips like a carrot and moved from side to side, his eyes moved from the water to Flay, and the vagueness was at once gone from them. In his stare was the whole story, and Flay, lifting his eyes from the top of his master's head, interpreted the vile expression. He had known that the attack upon his life was imminent. The coloured cakes, when he had found them on the 3 preceding occasions, had been successively closer to him. Swelter was trying to wreck him by torturing his mind and twisting his nerves, and he had not slept for many nights, but he was ready. He had not forgotten the two-handed cleaver in the green light, and had found in the armoury an old sword from which he had removed the rust and had sharpened to a point and an edge in the stone lanes. Compared to the edge which Swelter had given to the cleaver, the sword was blunt, but it was murderous enough. In Swelter's expression he could read the nearness of the night encounter. It would be within a week. He could not tell which day. It might be this very night. It might be any night of the next 7. He knew that Swelter could not see him until he was practically upon him at his master's door. He knew that the chef could not know that he had read his eyes so clearly. He also knew that he was banished from the castle grounds. Swelter must not know this. Gertrude would see that he, Flay, was not at Lord Sepulchre's door from now onwards, but he could return in the night and follow the monster as he crept upwards to the passageway on his lethal mission. That is what he would do. He would wait every night in the cloisters until the huge body stole by him and up the stairs. Not till then would he decide where and when to strike. He only knew that he must lead his foe away from his sick master's door, and that the death must take place in some remote part of the castle, perhaps in the room of spiders, or under the attic arches, or even among the battlements themselves. His thoughts were broken by a thud of fuchsia falling forward, and he saw the doctor rise to his feet and stretch across the table for a glass, his left hand moving around Fuchsia's shoulder as he did so. On the table itself, young Titus began to kick and struggle, and then with a high, thin cry, poor Mrs. Slagg watches him kick the vase of flowers over and tear at the lilac-coloured velvet with his hands. Steerpike hears the thud above him, and taking his cue from the varying contortions of the legs which hem him in, is able to guess pretty accurately what is happening. There are only 2 legs which do not move at all, and they are Gertrude's. Fuchsia's only visible leg, for her right is still curled beneath her, has slipped sideways on the boards as she slumps forward. Nanny's are struggling frantically to reach the floor. Lord Sepulchre's are swinging idly to and fro, and are close together like a single pendulum. Cora and Clarice are going through the motions of treading water. The doctors have straightened out into unbroken lengths, and his sisters have entered upon the last stages of a suicide pact, each one strangling the other with an ivy-like embrace. Swelter is shifting the soft, dace-like area of his feet backwards and forwards, a deliberate and stroking motion, as of something succulent wiping itself on a mat. Flay is rubbing the cracked toe cap of one of his boots rapidly up and down his shin bone immediately above the ankle, and, this done, Steerpike notices that his legs begin to make their way around the long table towards Fuchsia's chair, detonating as they go. During this short space of time, while the screaming of Titus is drowning the barking of Barquentine, Prunesqualler has dabbed a quantity of water over Fuchsia's face with a napkin, and has then placed her head gently between her knees. Barquentine has not ceased a moment in the administration of his duties, as the occasional lulls in Titus's howling testify, for during the short intervals of what might have been rain-filled silence, the dry, acid tongue of the librarian stutters on and on. But it is nearly over. He is laying his tomes aside. His withered stump, which, since Fuchsia's faint and the howling of Titus, has been scratching at the boards with an irritability such as might suggest that its ugly termination was possessed of teeth instead of toes, and was doing its best to gnaw its way through the oak boarding below it, this stump is now setting another business, that of getting itself and the rest of Barquentine upon the seat of the chair. Once aboard the long, narrow table, it is for him to march up and down it from end to end 7 times, regardless of the china and golden cutlery, regardless of the glassware, the wine, and the repast in general, regardless of everything in fact, save that he must be regardless. Mrs. Slag snatches the year-old baby from before the approaching crutch and withered leg, for Barquentine has lost no time in complying with tradition, and the ferrule of his crutch strikes jarringly upon the polished oak, or cracks upon the china plates or splinters the cut glass. A dull, soggy note, followed by a squelch, betrays the fact that his withered leg has descended ankle-deep in a tureen of tepid porridge, but it was not for him to turn aside in the promulgation of his duty. Dr. Prunesqualler has staggered away with Fuchsia in his arms, having instructed Flay to escort Lord Sepulchrave to his room. The Countess, strangely enough, has taken Titus from Nanny Slag, and having descended from the platform to the stone slabs below, is walking heavily to and fro with the little boy half over her shoulder. Now then, she says. No use crying. No use at all. Not when you're 2. Wait till you're 3. Now then, wait till you're bigger, and I'll show you where the birds live. There's a good child, there's a— Slag? She bellows suddenly, interrupting herself. Take it away. The Earl and Flay have gone, and so has Swelter, after casting a baffled eye over the table and at the wizened Barquentine as he stamps into the exquisitely prepared boiled breakfast. Cora and Clarice are left watching Barquentine with their mouths and the pupils of their eyes so wide open as to cause these caverns to monopolize their faces to the extent of giving to their countenances an appearance of darkness or of absence. They are still seated, and their bodies beneath their straight dresses are perfectly rigid, while their eyes follow the ancient's every movement, leaving him only momentarily when a louder sound than usual forces them to turn their eyes to the table to observe what the latest ornament to be broken may be. The darkness in the great hall has deepened in defiance of the climbing of the sun. It can afford to be defiant with such a pall of inky cloud lying over the castle, over the cracked, toothed mountain, over the entire and drenching regions of Gormenghast from horizon to horizon. Barquentine and the twins, trapped in the shadows of the hall, which is itself trapped within the shadows of the passing clouds, are lit by one lone candle, the others having guttered away. In this vast, overarching refectory, these 3, The vitriolic marionette in his crimson rags and the two stiff purple puppets, one at either end of the table, look incredibly minute, tiny fierce ribs of colour glinting on their clothes as the candle flame moves. The broken glass on the long table darting forth a sudden diamond from time to time. From the far end of the hall, near the servants' door, and looking down the inky perspective of stone pillars, the spectacle of the three at the table would seem to be taking place in an area the size of a domino. As Barquentine completes his 7th journey, the flame of the last candle stumbles, recovers, and then sinks suddenly into a swamp of tallow, and the hall is plunged into a complete obscurity, save where the lake in the middle of the hall is a pattern of darkness surrounded by depths of another nature. Near the margin of this inner rain-fed darkness, an ant is swimming for its life, its strength failing momentarily, for there are a merciless 2 inches of water beneath it. From far away, near the high table, comes a scream, and then another, and the sound of a chair falling to the stone slab 7 feet below the platform, and the sound of Barquentine cursing. Steerpike, having observed the legs disappearing out of the door, and to whom they belonged, has wriggled from his hammock under the table. He is groping his way to the door. When he reaches it and has found the handle, he slams it violently, and then, as though he has just entered the room, he shouts, "Hello there! What's happening there? What's the trouble?" On hearing his voice, the twins begin to scream for help, while Barquentine yells, "Light, scumcat! Light! Curse and split you!" Steerpike, whose last hour and a half has been a dire disappointment and boring in the extreme, hugs himself for joy at their shouts. "Right away, sir, right away!" He dances out of the door and down the passage. He is back in less than a minute with a lantern, and helps Barquentine off the table, who, once on the ground, batters his way without a word of thanks down the steps and to the door, cursing as he goes, his red rags glowing dully in the lantern light. Steerpike watches his horrid body disappear, and then, raising his high, sharp shoulders still higher, he yawns and grins at the same time. Cora and Clarice are on either side of him and are both breathing very loudly, their flat bosoms rising and falling rapidly like hatchways. Their eyes are glued upon him as he escorts them through the door, down the corridor, and all the way to their apartments, which he enters. The windows are streaming with rain. The roof is loud with it. "My dear ladies," said Steerpike, "I feel that some hot coffee is indicated, but what do you feel?"